Rich Cowboy pretends to sleep to test his maid and freezes at what she does. Before we begin, take a moment to comment your city. Where are you watching from tonight? And when the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Now find yourself a quiet place. Breathe deeply and let the whispers of the Wild West carry you into this evening's tale. Outside the window, winter wind whistled through the wooden frame, striking the frosted glass with waves of cold. In the wide study, the fire in the hearth had burned down to glowing embers, sending faint shadows across the shelves and the heavy oak desk. Ethan Rollins, a wealthy cowboy, a widower, rested his head against the chair, eyes closed, pretending to be asleep. The door creaked softly. Clara, the young maid, slipped inside. Her hands trembled as she drew a blanket from the back of the chair and gently laid it over her master's shoulders. In that fragile moment, her eyes filled with quiet compassion, and her lips whispered words that only the night itself could hear. Ethan kept still, feigning slumber. Yet inside, his long frozen heart stirred. The girl had spoken something that a lonely man could never forget. Dusk fell heavy upon the Wyoming valley, pouring fire across the sky. Behind the mountains, a red blaze stretched wide, painting the valley in shades of blood and shadow. The wind swept down from the high plateau, sharp as a knife, cutting through layers of wool and leather, seeping into seams and stitches, leaving its bitter sting deep in the bone. On the long wooden porch of his vast ranch, Ethan Rollins stood silent, his calloused hand gripping the rail. Folks still called him the richest man around, owner of 5,000 acres, herds of cattle beyond counting, and a house filled with treasures brought from Denver and St. Louis. But just then, all that wealth seemed only to deepen the echo of emptiness behind him. His gaze followed the sinking sun, but there was no light of hope in his eyes, only a shadow heavy with memories. 3 years had passed since the fever carried away his wife Sarah and their little boy James. On the far hill beneath the cottonwoods, where he had laid them to rest, white markers now shivered in the cold wind. A sharp gust rattled the cabin door behind him, but Ethan did not turn. For in that great house, there were no voices left to call his name. Only hollow rooms, heavy walls, and memories that refused to sleep. The brim of his hat shaded half his face, yet it could not hide the emptiness in his eyes, the look of a man who had survived the storm only to lose his soul in the battle. Each evening, he stood there watching the mountains burn red and then fade into shadow, as if waiting for something that would never return. Ethan Rollins, wealthy, strong, admired, yet at his core, a lonely man carrying wounds that bled no more but never healed. And he did not know that this harsh winter would bring him someone small, timid, yet strong enough to awaken a heart he thought had long turned to stone. Part 1. The Shy Maid. The wind still howled around the porch, but inside the ranch house, the glow of a kitchen lamp cast a golden warmth like a single flame, holding back the cruel Wyoming winter. The scent of wood smoke mingled with the rich aroma of beef stew, winding its way down the cold wooden halls. It was the familiar fragrance of a western winter, heavy, honest, and comforting after a long day against the snow and wind. Ethan Rollins pushed the door open, his boots crusted with snow, striking hard against the wooden floor, each step echoing sharp and dry. The ranchmaster, tall and broad-shouldered, wore a heavy coat draped across his frame. His face was set and silent like a stone pulled from the mountainside. In his gray, sorrowful eyes, there was no spark of warmth, no welcome for a shared meal. For him, supper had long been only a routine, another mark on a hollow string of days. The kitchen door creaked open. A small figure appeared holding a tray in both hands. Clara Bennett, the maid, who had been in his service for less than 3 weeks, stepped softly into view. The lamplight behind her crowned her narrow shoulders with a gentle glow, making her fragile frame seem even slighter. She paused at the threshold, bowing her head, as if even a breath too strong from her master might cast her out into the night. "Dinner is ready, sir." She said, her voice no stronger than wind over the prairie grass, soft, trembling, uncertain. Ethan's eyes flicked toward her, catching her timid form for only a heartbeat before turning away again. In the study, he answered shortly, his tone as low and steady as wood splitting under winter frost. Clara nodded quickly. She stepped forward, with small, cautious strides, the tray trembling in her hands. Steam curled upward from the bowl of beef stew, its savory spice weaving into the strands of wheat blonde hair she had tied in a hurried knot at the back of her neck. The thin veil of smoke almost softened her pale face and downcast eyes, too shy to meet the gaze of her master. Ethan led the way, his tall figure casting long shadows down the hall, while Clara followed close behind, like a faint ghost of herself. Each heavy step of his boots on the floor thudded in her chest like a drumbeat. Big houses like this often swallowed hired girls whole, and for Clara, fresh from the poverty of Ohio, everything here felt too vast, too strange, too dangerous. When they reached the study, Ethan dropped his hat onto the desk and settled into the large oak chair. The fire in the hearth had burned low, nothing left but the brittle crackle of dying embers. Clara set the tray carefully upon the desk, each movement delicate as though a spoon clinking against a plate might shatter the silence. For a fleeting moment, her eyes brushed across the portrait on the wall, a young woman in a wedding dress holding a small boy in her arms, her blue eyes alight with happiness. Clara froze, her hand shaking as she slid the tray back. The sight was too beautiful, too complete. It closed her throat with sudden ache. "You had a beautiful family," she whispered before she could stop herself, then bit her lip hard as if she had crossed a forbidden line. Ethan looked up. His eyes rested on her for a long pause, broken only by the quiet fall of ash in the hearth. "I did," he said softly, then bent once more over his papers. His voice was flat, but within it lived a fracture too deep to mend. Clara bowed quickly, retreating with the empty tray, like a sparrow fleeing the shadow of an eagle. The door closed behind her, leaving Ethan alone with a bowl of stew cooling on the desk and the silent gaze of the portrait watching from above. That night, as Clara washed dishes in the kitchen, the lamplight trembled against her tired face. The water stung cold against her reddened hands, but it was not the chill that made her tremble, it was the shadow of the man she served. The wealthy ranch master she thought looked more like someone left behind in a field of snow. Her dry lips murmured into the quiet, "He looks as if he's speaking to ghosts." At the far end of the house, Ethan sat in his wide, empty room, listening to the faint sounds of water from the kitchen. He could not make out the words, but his heart, so long accustomed to silence, stirred against its own stillness. Part 2. The night of pretending sleep. The fire in the hearth had faded, leaving only faint streaks of light flickering across the wooden walls. Ethan's study felt vast and hollow, every tick of the clock striking sharp and dry, echoing like knocks against his chest. On the far wall, the portrait of Sarah and little James glimmered in the glow of embers, their painted eyes holding a distant world Ethan could never reach. He leaned back in his chair, shoulders, slack eyes closed. But the rhythm of his breath was no true sleep. Tonight, for the first time after many lonely winters, Ethan chose to pretend. To pretend to sleep, to see what the timid maid, the girl with downcast eyes and a trembling voice, might do when she thought her master had drifted away into dreams. The wooden door creaked open so softly it was nearly drowned by the whistling wind in the hall. Clara stepped in arms, folded around a tray to gather the supper dishes. The worn soles of her shoes brushed against the carpet with the hush of a sigh. She paused, her eyes drawn to the broad figure slumped in the chair, his shoulders lost in shadow. "You've already fallen asleep," she whispered to herself, as if to steady her own nerves. She set the tray upon the desk, then hesitated. Her gaze lifted toward the portrait on the wall. Her breath lengthened her expression, wavering with sorrow. After a quiet moment, she reached for the wool blanket draped over the chair and gently pulled it across Ethan's shoulders. The gesture was clumsy, yet tender. "Sir, no amount of work will ever bring them back," she murmured, her voice breaking, believing only the darkness could hear. "I know. I once tried the same." Ethan kept his eyes closed, yet his heart clenched hard. Those words, how could they strike the very wound he had hidden for so long? This girl so young. How could she know loss so well? Clara moved to the fireplace, knelt softly, and laid a dry log on the embers. The wood crackled faintly, a small flame flaring to life, casting light across her weary face. Beneath skin pale from cold and toil, her gray eyes shone with a sorrow that carried its own history. "You had such a beautiful family," she whispered to the portrait. "But even though they're gone, you're still here. You still have breath. You still have tomorrow." Ethan shivered, not from the draft, but from the warmth in her words, warmth that caught him unguarded. This girl, how could she see him so clearly? Clara returned to his side, standing over his chair. She looked down at his closed eyes, his weary face etched deep with strain. "Sleep well, sir," she whispered. "Tomorrow, maybe gentler." She slipped away like a shadow, the door closing soft behind her. The room lingered with the faint scent of smoke and the comfort of a blanket. Ethan opened his eyes. His chest was heavy, yet strangely lighter. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to him of tomorrow. The next night, Ethan again pretended sleep. He let his body fall loose, his head leaning to one side, his breath steady as though he had sunk deep. Once more, Clara entered soft steps, shy eyes. But this time, after gathering the dishes, she placed a small tin box upon the desk. "Your hands are so cracked," she whispered, voice trembling yet firm. "My mother once made this beeswax balm. I hope it eases the pain." Ethan heard every word. His heart thudded as if someone had knocked gently at its door. Something small, something tender, but strong enough to break through his long winter of ice. Night after night, Clara repeated her quiet rituals, feeding the fire, pulling the blanket close. even tidying the ledgers that already stood in order. Yet it wasn't the acts themselves that shook Ethan, but the whispers, those fragile words she thought lost to the night. Sometimes I think, if my father were still alive, he would be proud to see me working honestly here. The girls who traveled on the same train, some had to end up in saloons in Denver. I was luckier. Sir, you are always sad, but you are not cruel. And for me, that alone is enough to be thankful. Each whisper was like a gentle knock against the locked door of Ethan's heart. He lay feigning sleep, but inside, every sense opened, taking in every syllable, every secret her voice released. One night, Clara lingered before the portrait. Her hand brushed the wooden frame. "You must have loved them dearly," she whispered, her throat tight. "I don't know what it feels like to lose your whole world. I only know. When my father died, I thought no one needed me anymore. But still, the morning came. Maybe, as long as we live, there is still hope." Ethan's chest pulled tight. He longed to open his eyes to tell her he understood, that he too knew what it meant to live with emptiness. But his lips would not move. A part of him feared breaking the fragile spell of her words, the only magic that had warmed this room more than any fire. On the 7th night, Clara entered looking paler than usual. Her hands trembled as she set down the tray, yet she did not forget to draw the blanket over him. "Please, sir," she whispered, "don't work yourself into exhaustion. No one can fight loneliness alone forever." Ethan kept his eyes closed, but his hands tightened beneath the blanket. For the first time in years, his heart stirred, not because of memories past, but because of a voice alive here in this very room. When Clara slipped away, he opened his eyes to the fire now burning brighter. In its light, the portrait of Sarah and James seemed to soften, and for a fleeting moment, Ethan wondered, could tomorrow truly be different because of one small girl brave enough to whisper into the dark part 3? An unexpected tenderness. The winter nights stretched on, as though they would never end. The wind from the mountains still swept down into Wyoming Valley, whistling through every crack and seam of the wooden house. Inside the ranch, the hearth fire had become the single flame holding back the cold. Yet something new had begun to weave itself into that silence, the timid footsteps of a young maid, and the whispers that only the night was meant to hear. On the 3rd night since Ethan had begun pretending sleep, Clara entered again with her familiar tray. Along with the dishes, she carried a small battered tin jar, which she placed upon the desk as carefully as if it were the most precious thing in the room, filled with luxuries. The lamplight revealed her slender hands reddened and raw from cold water. She hesitated, then whispered, "Your hands. They've cracked so badly. My mother used to make this beeswax balm. Just herbs and a little sheep's tallow. I hope you won't mind." Her voice trembled, but within each word shone a quiet devotion. Ethan's eyes still closed, heard every syllable. Beneath the blanket, his rough hands curled faintly. For years, no one had noticed the fissures in his skin. No one but this small, unassuming girl. In the dark, the corners of his mouth wavered, as though a word long buried might rise. But he stayed still, letting the spell of her gentleness linger. After placing the balm, Clara moved to the hearth. The embers were near spent, glowing faintly, like the slow beat of a tired heart. She knelt, added a dry log, and blew gently until the flames stirred back to life. The light caught her ash-gray eyes, usually so timid now, glimmering with a trace of resolve. The fire crackled in answer. The room grew brighter, warmer. She lifted her gaze to the portrait of Sarah and James and breathed a sigh. You still watch them, don't you? I know. Because whenever you look, your eyes seem ready to break. Ethan heard every word, and his chest tightened. All these years, no one had dared to speak to him so plainly. The housekeeper, the doctor, the townsfolk, everyone only saw him as the cold, wealthy rancher. Only this shy maid with her fragile intuition seemed to see the wound he carried. He still pretended to sleep, but his breathing changed slower, heavier, as though swallowing down a tide of memory. Night after night, Clara returned. Sometimes she spoke. Sometimes she simply straightened the blanket or shifted the ledgers that already lay neat. Yet her presence became the very thing Ethan waited for. He could not explain why he longed for those hushed footsteps, for the way she whispered into the room, for the soft light in her eyes when she bent before the fire. One night he heard her murmur, "In Ohio, the winters were harsher. But here, the cold feels different, not just on the skin, but inside the heart. You feel it too, don't you?" Ethan wanted to open his eyes, to nod, to say aloud, "Yes, yes, exactly as you say." But he remained still, his closed lids hiding the tremor rising through his chest. Another night, after clearing the dishes, Clara lingered long before the portrait. Her hand shook as she touched the wooden frame. "You loved them so deeply, so much that I can almost feel the ache myself. But sometimes love doesn't vanish. It only changes shape. Perhaps one day you will find another kind of love, softer, gentle enough to soothe the old wounds." Ethan lay as if asleep, but tears pricked at the corners of his eyes. He turned his head quickly, hiding the wetness in the shadows. Since the day he buried Sarah and James, he had not shed a single tear. Yet now, from a single whisper of this girl, he could not hold them back. When Clara slipped away, the room glowed with the new fire. The scent of smoke curled through the air, carrying a warmth unlike any other. Ethan opened his eyes and looked at the small tin jar on the desk, a simple thing, yet richer than all the treasures he had ever purchased. He laid his cracked hand upon it, feeling the coolness of the metal, as though he were holding her fragile hand itself. The corners of his mouth quivered, then lifted faintly, a smile thin, unsteady, but real, a smile that had not touched his face in years. Within his heavy chest, a small light flickered to life. He did not say it aloud, but deep inside, he knew those gentle whispers had awakened something in his heart, a spark of life he thought had long since died. Part 4. The unexpected illness. That winter night, the wind blew fiercer than usual. Outside the window, the branches of the cottonwood rattled hard against the wooden frame, their sharp knocks blending with the long wail of the wind like the mournful cry of a funeral horn. In the study, the fire had nearly died, its faint glow flickering across the portrait of Sarah and James, their painted eyes seeming to shimmer with unspoken worry. Ethan sat once more in his chair, eyes half closed, the picture of a man lost in heavy sleep. Yet, as on every night, his heart waited for those soft footsteps. And then the door opened. Clara entered, carrying the supper tray. But this time, her steps faltered, the tray rattling dishes clinking together in sharp alarm. Her cheeks were flushed, not from the fire, but from fever. Her breath came quick and shallow sweat beating on her brow despite the bitter cold outside. She tried to place the tray upon the desk, but her fingers gave way. A spoon slid from the edge, clattering to the floor. Clara stopped clutching her chest, and then her slight body pitched forward. The firelight struck her face red with fever, her lashes trembling as her eyes fell closed. Ethan sprang from his chair. No more pretense, no more distance. He crossed the room and caught her before she struck the floor. Clara. His voice broke urgent in a way it had not been in years. She startled awake, wide eyes blinking up at him in shock fear flashing across her face as she found herself cradled in her master's arms. You're awake. You knew all along. Her words quivered like dry leaves in the wind. Hush, Ethan murmured, his hands steady on her shoulders, his gray eyes burning with worry. You're burning with fever. Don't speak. He carried her to the large chair beside the desk. The wool blanket that had so often covered his own shoulders was now wrapped tenderly around hers. Her face was pale, flushed with heat, damp hair clinging to her brow. Ethan leaned close, his rough palm pressing to her forehead, scorching hot. For the first time in 3 years, his hands trembled not from winter's cold, but from fear. No need to call anyone, Clara whispered weakly. Please, don't trouble the housekeeper. I'll be fine. Just a little tired. You think I'll leave you like this? His voice cracked with anger at himself, harsh but broken. He turned sharply toward the door, his tone sharp as command. Henderson, fetch Tom. Send for Dr. Morrison. At once, Mrs. Henderson appeared at the threshold, pausing at the sight of Ethan kneeling beside the frail maid. But she said nothing, only nodded briskly and hurried away. The room settled into the sound of Clara's ragged breathing and the thunder of Ethan's own heart. He held her small, chilled hand in both of his, whispering low, You are not a burden. Do you hear me, Clara? Never a burden. Tears welled in her eyes. I was only afraid. If I grew weak, they'd cast me out. I've already lost everything. Ethan shook his head, his voice deep, but certain no one will take you away. Not while I'm here. His gaze blazed in the dim light, not the look of a broken man, but of one who had found something worth fighting for. When Dr. Morrison arrived, he studied Clara and gave a small, reassuring nod. Nothing serious. Exhaustion and fever. She needs rest, decent food, and time. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding, yet he did not step away from her side, not for a moment. The doctor looked at him, eyebrows lifting slightly, then gave a knowing nod. Strange to see you so concerned, Rollins. I'd say this is the first time in years I've seen your heart show itself. Ethan said nothing, but in the glow of firelight, his weary, steadfast eyes told the truth. Tonight had shattered the walls he had built around himself for so long. Part 5. The Fateful Blizzard. Outside, the night swallowed the valley whole. The wind howled long and low, like the cry of a lost wolf clawing at every door, every rooftop. Snow whipped through the air in furious spirals, so heavy it was impossible to tell where the sky ended and the ground began. Wyoming Valley lay buried beneath the fiercest blizzard of the winter. Inside the ranch house, oil lamps flickered unsteadily. Every door shuddered on its hinges as if ready to burst loose. Mrs. Henderson and the hired hands shoved sandbags against the cracks, but still the wind hissed through like knives on skin. Clara stood in the kitchen, heart clutched tight. Since the afternoon, Ethan had gone out to check the pregnant cattle, and now, too long had passed with no sign of his return. She forced her trembling hands to knot the window fastenings, though each gust nearly snuffed out the fire in the stove. Fear rose in her chest, nameless, but sharp. If he doesn't return, if that tall figure vanishes into the snow, as so many of her memories had. A crash split the night. The front door blew open with a violent bang. A blast of wind swept in, carrying a storm of snow and ice. Clara spun around, her heart stopping. Ethan staggered inside his tall frame coated white. His hair, his beard, his coat all stiff with ice, heavy with frozen clumps clinging to his shoulders. His lips were blue, his steps unsteady. His whole body trembled as though a single thread kept him tied to life. Sir Clara cried, her voice breaking against the wind. She rushed forward, just as his knees buckled at the threshold. His large hand reached out, but shook too hard to grasp anything. Clara caught it, her small fingers gripping his ice-cold ones with all the strength she had. No. Please, no. Her voice choked, tears glimmering in the lamplight. You can't leave me. Not like this. With Mrs. Henderson's help, she dragged Ethan close to the hearth. Clara dropped beside him, her thin hands rubbing at his frozen ones, desperate to stir warmth back into them. Her touch was too slight, too frail against the chill devouring him. Oh, Lord. He's so cold, she whispered, tears falling onto the back of his hand. Please don't leave me. Don't make me watch another soul disappear. She pulled the thickest blanket she could find around him, then bent low, breathing her own warmth into his numbed fingers. Her face hovered, close hair falling loose around her, but in her gray eyes burned a fierce resolve. Ethan's lids fluttered. Through the haze, he saw her face near his, her tears mixing with her breath upon his skin. He tried to speak, lips stiff, only managing a rasp. Clara. I'm here, she answered quickly, her voice trembling but steady. I'll keep you safe. You will not slip away in this cold night. As blood returned to his limbs, the pain stabbed sharp like 1,000 needles. Ethan groaned, his jaw clenched tight. Clara didn't let go. Her hands rubbed harder, her voice a steady murmur, as if rocking him through a storm. Hold on. Let me stay with you. You don't have to fight alone anymore. He shut his eyes, breath ragged, but her whispers, her fragile arms wrapped around him, became the anchor holding him fast. For the first time in years, Ethan allowed someone to touch his weakness, to press against the ache he had hidden. Mrs. Henderson brought a bowl of hot broth, coaxing spoonfuls into him. But it was Clara's hand, never once letting go of his, that tethered his spirit to the room, kept him from drifting away into the storm. Through the haze of fever and frost, Ethan heard her voice at his ear. You once lost everything, but I won't let you lose yourself. If God has given me even a little strength, then let me give it to you. His vision blurred, but his heart flared with a new fire, not from the hearth, but from her tenderness. A girl too small to stand against a blizzard, yet strong enough to thaw a frozen soul. While the wind screamed outside, a quiet miracle unfolded by the fire. A cowboy who thought his heart long dead found it beating again because one hand refused to let go. Hours passed before his shivering eased his breath, steadied the color returning faintly to his skin. He drifted into sleep at last, his head against the chair, his hand still clasped tightly in hers. Clara remained there, refusing to release him, eyes rimmed with tears, yet lips curled in a faint smile. "You're safe now?" she whispered, her voice weary but filled with relief. "You've come home, and this time, I won't let you be alone." The fire roared bright, casting its glow across two faces, one worn by hardship now resting, and one young face streaked with tears, yet shining with faith. Beyond the walls, the storm raged on, but inside the ranch house, a new warmth burned, born of care, of courage, and of a fragile girl strong enough to save a cowboy's frozen heart. Part 6. The Strange Fire Within. At last, the Wyoming winter withdrew like a wild beast that had roared itself weary. Snow melted, giving way to streams that trickled down from the mountainsides. The sky cleared deep and blue, as though no storm had ever passed. Across the pasture, tender blades of grass began to push through, trembling in the spring wind, while newborn calves wobbled uncertainly on their spindly legs. Inside the great ranch house, spring sunlight spilled across the polished wooden floor. No more the moan of bitter winds, only the cheerful chatter of sparrows beneath the eaves, their voices occasionally drifting into the quiet parlor. Clara sat near the window, her plain brown dress pooling softly at her ankles, a patch of fabric resting in her lap. The needle slipped in and out with small, neat stitches, each one careful and patient. Morning light fell across her shoulders, turning her wheat blonde hair to honey. Her face was bent in quiet focus, lips pressed together, curving now and then, with a faint smile when the thread aligned just right. It was a simple scene, yet it softened the room with a peace Ethan had not known in years. At the doorway, Ethan stood, watching, unwilling to disturb it. His broad hand rested against the frame, his deep eyes tracing every small movement she made. In the golden light, the weary lines on his face seemed to ease. For the first time in so long, his mouth curved upward, a true smile. Not forced, not hidden, but small and real, brightening his eyes with a quiet flame. Clara looked up suddenly and met his gaze. She startled her needle, pausing mid-stitch, her cheeks flushing pink. She quickly bent her head again, pretending to focus. Though her heart raced so wildly, she feared he might hear it. Ethan stepped forward slowly, the weight of his boots thudding low against the floor. He stopped before the window facing her. For a moment, Clara dared not lift her eyes, yet she felt the warmth of his breath, the familiar scent of leather and wood smoke. "You're stitching." Ethan spoke, his voice deep, roughened, but softened at the edges. "It's stronger than any I've ever seen." Clara lifted her gray eyes wide, then quickly dropped them again with a shy smile. "It's only what my mother taught me, sir." Ethan shook his head lightly. "Don't call me sir anymore." His eyes held hers steady. "Call me Ethan." The room seemed to hold its breath. Clara hesitated the request, like a line drawn in the dust, one step across, and she would no longer be just the maid, but someone who touched her master's heart. Ethan," she whispered, her voice quivering like wind through spring leaves. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, as if to seal the sound deep within him. His name spoken so simply, yet carrying a tenderness he had not heard in years. When he opened them again, the gloom was gone. Hearing that, it makes me feel like a man again, Clara. Her eyes shimmered, uncertain, but filled with quiet understanding. From that day, the house seemed brighter. Spring sunlight lingered longer in the windows. The laughter of calves outside softened the silence. And within Ethan's chest, a new fire smoldered, not fierce, not consuming, but warm and patient. He began to notice small things, the way Clara carefully set down a bowl of stew, how she blew out the lamp at night, how her hair fell loose when she bent over her sewing. Simple things, yet they became the moments he waited for. One afternoon, he found her at the well washing dishes. Sunlight caught the spray of water sparkling in her hair. Clara glanced up, saw him watching, and flushed, turning away. Ethan only smiled faintly and walked on toward the stables, though inside him stirred a strange new longing to hold on to that innocence. Evenings came, and Clara sat once more at the window, sewing in the fading light. Ethan sat opposite, pretending to read the newspaper, though his eyes strayed toward her again and again. The room filled with a peace that both of them knew did not come from spring alone, but from the quiet flame kindling between them. Clara looked up and caught him smiling. She dropped her gaze, quickly flustered, but warmth spread through her chest. For the first time, Ethan whispered, not to the silence, but to her clear enough for her to hear, "Tomorrow. Perhaps winter won't feel so cold anymore." Clara looked up, her eyes wide with wonder, then softened into a gentle smile. And in that smile, a small flame answered his own, burning bright. Part 7. The Dance and the Look. May arrived, and with it the season of calves filling the valley with new life. To celebrate, the townsfolk gathered for a barn dance at the Parker Ranch. The wide wooden shed, whitewashed fresh, hung with golden paper lanterns, whose glow shimmered across the planks. The fiddle sang boots, struck the floor in lively rhythm, and laughter rose with the music. The air was warm and joyful, a sharp contrast to the dark storms of winter just past. Clara stood tucked into a corner, her hands clasped tight before the skirt of her plain blue dress. Her cheeks glowed pink with shyness as her eyes flitted nervously, then dropped quickly, afraid of being noticed. Around her, girls in bright dresses twirled with ribbons in their hair, radiant with laughter. Clara felt herself a small shadow too plain to step forward. Then Ethan appeared in the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a black coat and polished boots. His presence drew glances from many, the quiet awe reserved for the wealthiest man in the valley. But his eyes sought only one figure, the small girl trying to hide herself in the shadows. He walked straight toward her, each step sure and steady against the wooden floor. To Clara, the room seemed to fall away, leaving only the narrowing space between them. She started when he stopped before her. Mr. Ethan?" She stammered, wide-eyed, unable to believe he had chosen her among so many radiant women. Ethan extended his hand, his gaze gentle yet firm. "Clara Bennett, will you give me the honor of a dance?" Clara shrank back a step, her heart racing. I don't know how. And everyone will be watching." "Let them watch," Ethan said, his voice low, steady. "I'll be with you." There was a pause. Then Clara's trembling hand lifted, resting in his. His warmth spread into her fingers, leaving her no way back. The music swelled, the fiddle's tune quickening. Ethan led Clara onto the dance floor. Heads turned, whispers rose, but Ethan paid them no mind. He placed his strong hand at her back, guiding her carefully. At first, Clara stumbled, her small shoes brushing clumsily against his boots. Her face burned, and she whispered an apology. But Ethan only smiled, murmuring, "Look at me, not the floor." She lifted her eyes and found his no longer cold, but filled with warmth. It was as though a hidden current carried her forward, her steps falling into rhythm with the music. Then Clara laughed, a clear ringing laugh light as ice breaking on the river. The sound startled the crowd into sudden silence, then softened into smiles. Ethan's heart turned over. He had not heard anything so beautiful in years. When the song ended, applause rose around them. Clara blushed, trying to withdraw her hand, but Ethan held it firmly, refusing to let go. He bent close, speaking low, so only she could hear one more dance. She shook her head shyly, but his gaze held her steady, tender, unwavering, carrying something she could not refuse. "Yes," she whispered. This time she moved with ease. They turned and spun beneath the lanterns, her face alight, his gaze proud and warm. And in that moment, Ethan Rollins, wealthy, somber, long withdrawn, was no longer the man apart. He stood openly beside a simple maid for all to see. As the second tune ended, Ethan leaned close to her ear. "Do you know, your smile tonight saved me from the longest winter of my life." Clara froze, eyes shimmering. "But I'm only a maid." "No," Ethan answered firmly. "You are the reason I can smile again." Her cheeks burned hot, her heart pounding like a runaway colt. The music rose again. The crowd swept into a new dance. But for Ethan and Clara, the world blurred into quiet. Only their eyes held each other, eyes that confessed what words had not. In that moment, the hidden feelings between them stepped into the light. And beneath the golden glow of lanterns, a silent cowboy and a timid maid found joy so simple, so radiant, it could banish even the harshest winters. Part 8. Cruel Whispers. The sun rose high, spilling gold across the main street of the little town. Wooden stalls stood crowded together, displaying red apples, loaves of bread, and hand-woven wool. The air hummed with the sounds of horses neighing, wagon wheels crunching over gravel, and merchants calling out their wares. Clara walked among the bustle, clutching a willow basket tight against her chest. Inside lay only a few loaves and a pouch of salt, yet the weight pressed on her as if she carried a mountain. Her head bowed, low strands of wheat blonde hair falling loose, her gray eyes shadowed with sorrow. From both sides of the street, the whispers came. At first light, as wind yet sharp as a blade against the heart, did you see the maid who dared to dance with Rollins? The richest rancher in the valley, choosing a penniless orphan, climbing far above her place. Clara quickened her pace, but each word clung to her like thorns. Near the cloth merchant stall, a cluster of women stood together, dresses, neat shawls, bright and fine. As Clara passed, one of them spoke loudly enough for all to hear. Girls like that only use their pitiful looks to catch a man's favor. A ripple of laughter followed. A single glance flicked toward Clara, cold-cutting, full of disdain. Clara faltered her hand, tightening on the basket handle. Heat rushed to her cheeks, but she said nothing. Head lowered, she walked on. Her worn shoes pressed into the dust, leaving faint footprints behind. The sweet scent of baked bread drifted from a nearby stall, yet to Clara it tasted bitter in the air. for in that moment she had never felt more out of place. At the end of a narrow alley, she paused, leaning against the brick wall, drawing in a sharp breath. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she forced them back. She must not cry. She must not let them see. Still, the words echoed in her mind. The maid, climbing high, using him. She remembered the dance the night before, the way Ethan's hand held hers, the warmth of his steady gaze. In that moment, the world had disappeared. But now every eye turned into an arrow piercing her chest. By noon, she returned to the ranch. She set the table, but could not eat. Mrs. Henderson watched closely, her brow furrowed. "Child, your face is pale, your eyes swollen. What happened at the market?" Clara shook her head. Her voice caught. "Nothing. I'm just tired." Mrs. Henderson sighed, her hand resting gently on the girl's shoulder. "I've lived in this town all my life. I know the looks people give. But remember, this kindness is never a crime. Don't let their poison steal your hope." Clara nodded faintly, though inside she felt hollow. That night, after finishing her chores, she lingered at the doorway of Ethan's study. The portrait of Sarah and James glowed faintly in the firelight. She stared at it for a long time, her lips trembling with unspoken fear. "If you were still here, ma'am, would you accept me? Or would you think I'm nothing more than a shameless servant? I never meant to take what isn't mine. I only wanted to stay beside him. But maybe I don't deserve it." Her tears fell, then drops darkening the wooden floor. Ethan was not in the room. Yet if he had heard, his heart would have burned with fire. Later in her small bed, Clara curled tightly beneath the quilt, her eyes wide in the darkness. The gentle spring wind whispered outside the window, but it could not ease her sense of being utterly alone. She whispered to herself, "Perhaps I should leave before things grow worse, before I shame his name." In the silence of that night, Clara's heart bled not from snow or storm, but from the cruelest trial, yet harsh whispers sharp enough to crush a love only just beginning to bloom. Part 9. The confession that kept her. Late at night, the ranch lay quiet. Only the dim glow of an oil lamp cast long shadows down the hallway. Spring winds slipped through the cracks, carrying the scent of fresh grass and the faint chill that lingered from winter. At the end of the hall, a small valise sat by the door. On top lay Clara's wool scarf, hastily folded. The slight figure of the young maid stood trembling in the weak light, her hand clenched tight around the handle. She drew in a deep breath, then turned ready to walk out of the heavy door, out of the house that had given her warmth, but had now become a place of judgmental stares and whispers. Before she could pull it open, a voice rose behind her. "Where are you going, Clara?" She spun around. In the lamp's glow stood Ethan Rollins, his tall frame filling the doorway. His long coat cast shadows across the floor, and his deep eyes held her fast. She faltered, stepping back, tears slipping down her cheeks. I can't stay here anymore. They say I'm clinging to you, shaming your name. I don't want..." Her voice broke her small shoulders, trembling. Ethan strode forward each step, heavy, deliberate, until he stood before her. His hand came down over the valise, stopping it in place. "You'd think I care for their whispers?" His voice was low, steady, but filled with fire. "But you are Ethan Rollins, the richest man in the valley, and I am only an orphaned maid. Clara." He spoke her name firmly, not allowing her to go on. His eyes burned with resolve, yet softened with warmth that nearly broke her. I've lived long enough to know wealth is nothing but a shell. What I lack, what I've longed for, is a true heart. And you've given me that." Clara shook her head, tears streaming. "I only wanted you to be happy. But if being near me brings you shame, I'd rather leave." Ethan said no more. He took her small hands in his large calloused ones, holding them firmly. His voice dropped deep and earnest. "Listen to me, Clara. I don't need a grand lady. I don't need the town's praise. The only thing I need is you." Her lips trembled. "Why? Why me?" "Because your heart is stronger than all the wealth I own. Because you were the first after all these years to make me smile. Because when I thought I had died in that winter, it was you who kept me alive." He bent closer, his voice breaking like a vow. "I love you, Clara. Please, don't go. Stay and build this life with me, not as a servant, but as my wife." The silence seemed to hold its breath. Clara sobbed, her tears falling onto the hands he held so tightly. She trembled but did not pull away. "Ethan," she whispered, speaking his name through tears for the first time. "I've been afraid of so much, but what I fear most is losing you." Ethan drew her into his arms. She fell against his broad chest, hearing the pounding of his heart. He held her close, whispering into her hair. "Then don't leave. From now on, I'll protect you. Be it blizzards or cruel tongues, you will never face them alone." The lamp flickered, casting their two figures locked in embrace against the dark hall. The little valise still stood by the door, but it no longer mattered. Clara lifted her tear-bright eyes, a flicker of hope breaking through. "If I stay, they'll still talk. Let them," Ethan answered with a soft, proud smile. "All that matters is this: I've chosen you, and I will never regret it." In that moment, the wall of doubt crumbled. A cowboy whose heart had long been frozen laid bare his love, holding fast the timid maid with all his faith. And for Clara, her tears no longer fell from sorrow, but from the joy of a heart newly redeemed. Part 10. The Vow Beneath the Cottonwood. That Wyoming morning was clear as glass. Spring sunlight fell gentle through the budding branches of the old cottonwood, the leaves trembling softly in the breeze, scattering dappled shadows across the ground. Beneath the tree, where two small white headstones rested in silence, a plain wooden table had been set covered in rough linen. On it lay a Bible, a bundle of wildflowers gathered from the meadow, and two simple silver rings. There were no church bells, no organ music, only sparrows singing in the branches and the quiet whisper of leaves. Clara stood there in a modest white dress she had sewn with her own hands, every stitch carrying her heart. Her grip on the bouquet trembled with the beat of her racing heart. Her wheat blonde hair fell softly about her face, the breeze lifting it gently, flushing her cheeks with color. Her gray eyes shimmered shy, but brimming with happiness. Never had she imagined that an orphaned maid, timid and small, would one day stand here beside the man who once seemed as distant as the sky itself. Ethan approached in a simple white shirt beneath a dark brown coat. Upon his weathered face, at last a smile had returned, steady, genuine, a smile born after years of grief. He stopped before Clara and reached for her trembling hand. His grip was firm, warm, a promise that she would never again face life alone. Clara lifted her gaze. In Ethan's gray eyes, there was no shadow, only trust and love. Before the minister began, Ethan turned toward the headstones beneath the cottonwood, where Sarah and little James rested. Bowing his head, His voice was deep, trembling slightly Sarah James. Today I stand here not to forget you, but to keep your memory alive. I believe love does not vanish, it only changes form. Bless me now. Bless Clara too. A soft wind rustled the branches, the cottonwood leaves answering like a benediction. Clara watched tears slipping quietly, not of sorrow, but of peace. The minister opened the Bible, his voice calm and steady, filling the hush. Son and daughter of God, you come to make covenant, to promise love, protection, and companionship through storm or sunshine. Ethan Rollins, do you so vow? Ethan turned to Clara, his hand tightening on hers. I vow it, with all I have left, with a heart once thought frozen. I give it to you, Clara. From this day, you are no servant, no outcast. You are my wife, my partner, my life. The minister looked to Clara. Clara Bennett, do you vow the same? Tears streamed down her cheeks, but her smile shone radiant. I vow it. Whether rich or poor, strong or weak, I will remain by your side. Ethan, from the day you called me by name, I knew I had found the place where I belong. The simple silver rings were exchanged. Ethan slipped the band onto Clara's trembling hand, his broad palm enveloping hers. In that moment, all the whispers of the town, all the judgments melted away. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the minister declared. Ethan leaned down, brushing his lips gently against Clara's. A tender kiss filled not with fire, but with peace and promise. The spring breeze stirred the leaves, sparrows sang bright and clear. Beneath the cottonwood, once a witness of loss, a new beginning had taken root. Clara rested her head against Ethan's chest, her hand gripping his tightly. He wrapped her close eyes closed, savoring a peace he had thought forever lost. Tomorrow, Ethan whispered, voice husky with hope. Clara lifted her eyes shining in the light. Tomorrow will be our new beginning. The cottonwood stirred above them leaves, whispering like a blessing. And within their hearts, a true home had been built, not of wood or stone, but of love and grace. Night fell across Wyoming Valley. Summer's first moon spread silver across the fields, reborn after a long winter. In the distance, the ranch lamps glowed warm, like a beacon in the dark. On the porch, Ethan stood with Clara in his arms. She leaned her head against his chest, eyes closed, letting the strong beat of his heart lull her into peace. His hand closed firm over hers, as if to promise that no storm could ever tear them apart again. Before them, the green field swayed in the evening breeze, a wordless hymn of renewal. Calves called for their mothers, crickets sang beneath the brush. All around was the gentle music of the West, where life rose again from loss. Ethan bent low, whispering in Clara's ear, "Tomorrow truly is a new beginning." She looked up, her eyes silvered by moonlight, her smile tender through the tears still clinging there. Yes, Ethan. And we will walk through every tomorrow together always. The man who had once been alone and the girl once dismissed as small had found one another. Together, they had built a home no storm could destroy. In the harsh lands of the West, love and kindness had become their shelter. And under the moon that night, that shelter shone brighter than any lamp. For in this wild country, where blizzards and cruel tongues once sought to bury them, Ethan and Clara had proved that a single hand held and a heart willing to love could melt even the longest winter. Before you drift to sleep, if this story has touched your heart, leave a comment with the city you're listening from and rate it from 0 to 10. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you won't miss the next journey into the healing tales of the Wild West. Until we meet again, may you have a peaceful night.